This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodette. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
And American Pharoh makes his run for glory as they come into the final furlong. Frosted is second with 1/8 of a mile to go. American Pharoh's got a 2-length lead. Frosted is all out at the 16th pole. And here it is. The 37-year wait is over. American Pharoh is finally the one. American Pharoh has won the Triple Crown.
All right, back at it with the 101st episode of Play-by-Playcast. We'll get to that in a second. My name is Joel Godet. Thanks, as always, for the subscribe, the stream, the download, for joining us here on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or wherever you have found this podcast. It, as always, is the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster, a professional development podcast that dives into professional development podcast diving into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, and preparations of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. You can find it on social media at PXPcast. You can find me on social media at Joel Godet, JoelGodett, or you can shoot me an email, jgodett at bsu.edu. Our guest today on the 101st episode of PXPcast is Larry Collmus, timely guest, and I'm excited to have him on the pod today. He's the voice for NBC of the Triple Crown, which is going on right now. The Kentucky Derby was last weekend. The Preakness is next weekend, and then the Belmont Stakes to follow 3 weeks after that. Larry has been the voice of the Triple Crown and the Breeders' Cup on NBC since 2011. We'll get to Larry here in just a second. You'll notice, though, I said it's the 101st episode of Play-by-Playcast. Last week was 99. If you haven't caught our interview with Lanny Fratteri, by the way, do go back and check it out. The former voice of the Pittsburgh Pirates, very nuanced, kind of wonky conversation about how you call a game, how you prep for a game. We talked about why they're called book rule doubles and not ground rule doubles in baseball. By the way, I called a game on Wednesday with a pair of ground rule doubles. I called them book rule doubles. Nobody complained. Hey, be the change you want to see in the broadcasting world. We're gonna convert people one by one. But do check out Lanny Fratteri's interview in episode 99. Episode 100, I've moved around a little bit, so to speak, because I did say last week that the person that was going to be on episode 100 is somebody you would know, but also somebody that meant a lot to me in terms of the early foundations of my broadcasting career. And he and I didn't have a chance to connect over the last couple of weeks. We're both very busy people. He's in season right now. I'm doing like 95 different things right now. But I do still want to bring that conversation to you when it happens, and it will be for what it's worth. Like, listen, it's a podcast. They're all episodes. They happen like sequentially, like episodically every week. But for whatever reason, we'll still call that 100 when it happens. And I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm excited to share it with you guys as well. So technically, we'll call this one 101 for today. Before we get to Larry Collmus, though, a quick update on what's going on in my broadcasting world. Closing down Ball State baseball season. 2 weekends left in the regular season. Just did a lacrosse tournament on television last week. Just did a tennis tournament on television the week before that. And in 2 weeks' time, at the conclusion of Ball State baseball season, I'm also going for another sport I don't usually broadcast. I'm broadcasting the CrossFit Regionals. Not the CrossFit Games, but the Regionals, the round before the games, which is cool in and of its own right. And I got excited when this offer was presented to me a couple of months ago. And I looked at the date, and I looked at where the Regionals were, and I was like, sweet, I'm going to Nashville, because it seemed close to me, and, in this country. That was wrong. That was an incorrect guess. I'm excited because in a couple of weeks' time from now, I'm going to broadcast the CrossFit Games Regionals, or the CrossFit Games Regional Round, from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, a country I've never been to. I don't speak Portuguese. It's the Latin American regional round. I don't speak Spanish either. So prep has been very interesting because I've been trying to learn the names, statistics, and backstories of over 100 CrossFit athletes. And any articles I can find on them, not in English. Now, I do have the Google extension where I can translate stuff, and I've found some stuff and been able to translate it. But I've also found a ton of YouTube videos and a ton of podcasts that are in Portuguese or in Spanish. And as much as it would be really cool to listen to all of those, it's French to me. Technically, it's Portuguese to me, or Spanish to me, but I don't know what I'm listening to. So I've hit one of the interesting roadblocks that I've never actually asked any of the broadcasters that have done the Olympics about on this podcast. And that's how you get information from athletes from other countries. I've actually sent Facebook messages to almost all of the athletes that are competing in this CrossFit regional. And I've said, hi, my name is Joel. I'm doing the regional. Can you please send me the following information? And I sent them a 10-point questionnaire. And a handful of them have gotten back to me, and it's been very helpful. But it's been a very, very informative experience to try to figure out how to broadcast an international event when you are an American who speaks one language. I'm excited for it, though, and I'll have some more information as we get closer to that and certainly break down how it goes for you on this podcast afterward. But that is what's coming up on the horizon for me as I try to dust up on my Portuguese. On that note, I've got like 95 windows open on my computer right now, and half of them are CrossFit Games related, and one of them is a bio on Larry Collmus. So let me tell you about Larry before we dive into the interview. He's been with NBC since 2011 when he took over for Tom Durkin, who preceded him, and he has since succeeded Tom Durkin as well with the New York Racing Association. But Larry began calling horse racing, and it's the only sport he's ever broadcast. He dove into it when he was young and got good at it, and is a testament to just going into your own corner of the universe and getting good at your craft, because people will notice when you're good at your craft. Larry started at the Bowie racetrack in 1985 when he was just 18 years of age and slowly worked his way up to Laurel Park and Pimlico and Timonium racetrack. I'm not sure where that is. I know he's also worked at Monmouth Park, which is in New Jersey, Gulfstream Park, Suffolk Downs. Gulfstream Park is in Florida. And a couple of times was turned down as the track announcer at Churchill Downs, which is hilarious now. He just called the Derby last week. And like anybody, we've had this conversation many a time on the pod. You have those thoughts. Is it going to happen for me? Am I ever going to get that big break? And then in 2011, he gets a phone call that he thought was a prank, originally, saying, hey, it's NBC. Would you like to call the Triple Crown? He went off in his world, worried about him, worried about getting better, worried about doing good work, and the right people noticed, and the right people found him. And now everybody hears him for three of the biggest days in sports every year. Say what you want about the popularity of horse racing compared to the NBA or the NFL or whatnot, but like we all watch those three Triple Crown races, and his voice is a part of that, and forever will be a part of it, because he also got to call the Triple Crown. Two of his most famous calls will be the Breeders' Cup win for American Pharoh, horse of a lifetime, and the Triple Crown win for American Pharoh. The 37-year wait is over. American Pharoh is finally the one. His other famous call is between two horses called My Wife Knows Everything and the Wife Doesn't Know, but that's less important. Really good testament to hard work, earning your stripes, biding your time, and having good things happen to people that work really hard. I don't know Larry. Larry doesn't know me. I wanted to have him on. I thought it would be really cool to dive into the world of horse racing broadcasting. So I reached out to him on a whim, and he said yes. And I'm excited to have his conversation with you here on the 101st episode of Play-by-Playcast. We start, of course, where else? What it's like to call a Triple Crown when American Pharoh made the run for history.
Can't imagine it getting any better than that. I mean, it was an amazing experience that day at Belmont Park, and having gone through the Kentucky Derby in Preakness with American Pharoh, and hoping, that he was going to be the horse to break through and finally do it, and then, actually be the guy that got to narrate it. It was just an incredible thing to be a part of.
How much prep did you do going into that? I mean, I've read all the articles where you've talked about, even rehearsing some things in your hotel room and hoping that people couldn't hear you in the next room over. What was the angst going into that for you to make sure that, hey, I'm going to do this right if this indeed is what happens today?
It's funny. I had had some discussions with several different people leading up, pretty much minutes after the Preakness had continued, finished, and I was like, what's the best approach here? And I had a dinner one night with a fellow that I absolutely revere, Tom Hammond, from NBC Sports, and he's done so many big events over the years, and he said, Larry, if you're going to be calling a moment of history, you better be prepared. And that's when, I threw out all that thought of winging it, which a lot of people said, oh, it would be more natural if you wing it. I'm like, no, it won't. You want to say the right thing. And leading up, I just thought of, what is everyone feeling? And I came up with, well, he's finally the one, and the 37-year wait is over. And so this kind of got in my head. Now, the thing is, when you're calling a horse race, nothing's guaranteed, and there's certainly a chance it could be too close. But in my case, luckily, American Pharoh came through and gave me the opportunity to say what I thought was the best thing to say under the scenario, and he let it work out for me, and I have him to thank.
I was going to say, did you have like a contingency? Like if it's a closer race, this is where I'm going to go, or if it's the way that it panned out, that's what you wind up with?
No, I really didn't. I just had a contingency plan if he lost, just thoughts on what I would say. But if it got too close, then you're just in your element calling a horse race. And then at that point, you really have to just wing it or try to, call what you see. But if you know that it's going to be the moment, you want the right words for the moment.
I know you also didn't read the card. You had it written down in front of you, but you didn't look down at it, obviously, while the race is happening. What's it like in your person in that moment, like the out-of-body experience, and almost saying, like, I've prepared for this moment so that it comes out right, but at the same time, maybe just something else comes out because, the moment is so big, and we all get swept up in those things.
No doubt about it. And when the race is over, you're thinking, well, what did I say? Did I say what I wanted to say? Because you really, it's weird. You are, especially at that level, when you're calling a Kentucky Derby or calling a Triple Crown, you're trying to control your heart rate and trying to just stay in the moment and not go too crazy. But you really don't even realize what you're saying. Your brain is just so complicated. You hope that your brain and your mouth are working together, and what you want to say is actually what comes out. And that, luckily, in my case, it did that day. And there have been other days where you maybe have called a wrong horse, maybe just during the race, and didn't even realize it until you watch the replay. And you thought you called the right one. It's like, did I say that really? And that your brain is just not cooperating with your mouth that day, and hopefully it's not a big deal, in a high-pressure race like the Derby.
I do want to come back to that sentiment here in a second, but I want to ask you one more thing about the American Pharoh call in particular, too, in that I read you also had listened back to other previous Triple Crown calls. Why was that important to you, and what did you glean from that helped you either perform the way you did that day or just kind of settle some nerves going into it?
Well, luckily for me, the guys that have been doing this before me have been just absolutely outstanding at what they do. Tom Durkin and Dave Johnson, two legends in the horse racing announcing business, and Tom Durkin is a master of words. And I wanted to listen to how he handled it, and Tom, every time had it not happened. The guy called races for 24 years in New York and had 9 chances at a Triple Crown, and every one fell through. But I did want to hear how he handled all of those calls, and I also wanted to hear, how Dave Johnson, and before him Chick Anderson, who was the fellow that called Secretariat's Belmont Stakes, how they handled when a Triple Crown actually did happen. And I just wanted to listen to, that for an historical context, and just get me in the frame of mind of what I should be thinking when I had to do it.
Take me inside just the general how-to of this, because I'm going to take a random guess that most people that are listening to this are probably not veteran horse racing announcers. A lot of basketball, a lot of football, a lot of baseball, and I'm of that ilk as well. And I've never been in that position where your entire job comes down to this 2-minute stretch. And you talked about hopefully your brain and your mouth are in sync in those 2 minutes because it's such a fever pitch. What is it like to broadcast a sporting event that happens in 2 minutes at a time, at the pace at which it occurs?
Well, it's the only thing I've ever done. I've called horse racing my entire career, and so I can't really compare it to other sports because it's sort of my thing. But yeah, I mean, you do put in a lot of preparation for a short period of time, and it differs in that. Let's say it's the day of racing that you're calling. Your normal day job is I would say at Belmont Park, where I call the races on a regular basis. You have to call 9 or 10 races a day. So every half an hour, you have a new cast of characters that you have to say. And so it's, I've heard it referred to as a bathtub memory, and that you empty it out and then you fill it up again. You just keep forgetting horses' names and remembering horses' names. But in the case of, the Kentucky Derby, now you're going to prepare for this thing for months, and start watching replays of all the prep races and getting these horses in your head, because there's 20 horses and it's the fastest and greatest 2 minutes in sports, and you better be ready. So when those horses come onto the track at 10 minutes to post time, they have to be your 20 best friends that like the back of your hand. Whereas, maybe the 4th race at Belmont Park on a Thursday, you may peek down at your program a couple times and say, now, who's that horse again? But that's not going to happen in the Kentucky Derby. So there's so much memory involved, short-term memory, that you just completely abuse your brain with it to the point where you don't remember what you had for dinner the night before. It's just remember, forget, and I think it's very very much one of the very different, I should say, than other play-by-play jobs. I think it's sort of its own thing, and I think hockey's probably the closest thing to it.
How do you remember, forget? Like, what goes into that skill set?
You just do.
Okay.
I think your brain just adjusts to anything you ask it to do for the most part, and that's pretty much what I ask it to do 10 times a day. And you sometimes forget things you don't want to forget when you're doing that process. But the remembering part is basically it's the jockey silks that I use as the guide, and what I'll do is I will. I'm not as old school as you'd think I would be these days. I actually call races off of an iPad, and I've got a program called Notability where I will color in all of the jockey silks next to the horses' names, and I do my own artwork, and then I'll use that as a guide when the horses come onto the track, and just kind of get them all in my head so that I know who they are, and if I can say every horse's name looking through by my binoculars without looking down at my program, I know I'm good to go. And, once the horses cross the wire, once that race is over, all of a sudden, your brain just wipes them out, and they're gone. And the new group is a half an hour later, and you got to get them in your head.
How, what physically goes into calling a race? Like, if you had to describe to somebody exactly what you're doing while a horse race is happening, in terms of what you're looking for, what's important for you to say, what's important for you to call out, kind of what's the time and score, so to speak, of broadcasting a horse race?
They're different race to race. Everyone is unique. The Kentucky Derby is the only race that I go in with a total game plan. And the reason for that is because there's 20 horses in a race like that, and that's the only race that you call that has 20 horses. The rest of the year, you hardly call anything that's over 12. And so I want to prepare myself, and I time it out so that I hit that 20th horse by the time they run the first half mile of the Kentucky Derby, and then I announce how fast that half mile is, and I've kind of got it down to the second these years after doing it for the 8th time this year. But that's the one race you have the game plan. Otherwise, I pretty much just let it go and just follow the action, and I do focus a little bit on the horse that's taking the most betting, the favorite in the race. You want to mention that horse and what that horse is doing, maybe more than the others, just because most of the people watching the race do have a bet on that horse. But otherwise, you call the horses, their positions, what the jockeys are doing on that horse, if it's important, the fractional times. You just follow that action, and you look for horses that may be making a move from the back of the pack while still focusing on the leaders. Your eyes and your mouth are sort of everywhere.
What are you committing to memory too, by the way? Because I loved the videos that they take of you in the booth broadcasting the Kentucky Derby on NBC, and I mean, you talked about the binoculars, and it's just you watching the track with your binoculars, and you can see your charts in front of you and your prep in front of you, but you don't go to it because your eyes are glued on the track, and I don't even think you looked at the monitor in the ones that I was watching. How much is it, like, I mean, if I gave you a random horse in the race, could you tell me jockey, silks, how it runs, all that? What are you trying to learn about a horse, and how much of that can you just recite off the top of your head?
Well, in the Kentucky Derby, I mean, you follow all of that. So I would, during the week, what I did was I made myself some cue cards, basically index cards, flashcards, and I had the horses' silks, the jockey silks on one side, and then I would say, I would look at this one and say, okay, Justify. Mike Smith is the jockey. He's going for his 5th Kentucky Derby, or whatever the number was. That was actually Bob Baffert's 5th. But anyway, I would say that information to myself, along with where I thought maybe that horse's running style would be. He would be up near the front, and anything else that's important. So I would just kind of whip through the 20 cards that I had and give myself a little test at least 2-3 times a day.
But most of that stuff isn't stuff you're going to directly use over the course of a race, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It's stuff that you want in case you need, to say it. There's so many possibilities of things that can happen during a race. And I came up with a few lines that I thought might be good if different horses had won the Kentucky Derby, and sort of thought about those too. You just sort of get them in your head and ingrain it in there, and hope it comes out if you need it.
What's that wordplay like, and the liberties that you take? Where can you have fun in broadcasting horse racing that way?
I tend to have a lot of fun with it. I especially when we're running up at Saratoga in New York in the summer, that racing meet is a little bit different than calling at Belmont Park, in that it's highly attended, and people are having a good time up there. And I'll play around with horses' names now and again. If I see a certain situation come up where I can have fun with a horse's name, I'll go ahead and do it. And just kind of enjoy that, and just think of, like, if a horse is named after a character in a movie or something like that, try to come up with a line from that movie, maybe something that matches the horse's name, and if it goes over everybody's head, that's even better. So
I feel like that's the challenge.
Yeah, just have a little bit of fun, and that's part of it. I mean, there is a bit of entertaining involved. I mean, you're more of an information guy, but it's good to have a little personality and have a little fun.
I will tell you that many Kentucky Derby days while I've been broadcasting baseball, I have often written down a list of all of the horses' names that have won previously, and I will try to work them in a similar fashion without people noticing.
Exactly.
In certain
cool.
ways to just make it, and certain ones are easier than others. But that's
Justify will be easy for you.
That'll be a very easy one. 100%.
I don't know what you did with California Chrome, but
yeah, I think I probably failed there. But you never know.
That'd be tough.
Tell me about the binocular part of that too. You never take your eyes off the track. I figured, sometimes maybe it might be easier to call something like that off a monitor. Why is it better for you to watch it live?
Well, I don't want to depend on anyone else.
That's fair. Yeah.
If you're calling off of a monitor, you do. Because if you're calling a race, you want to get as much peripheral vision as you possibly can and do it your own way. So if I'm controlling what I see through blind binoculars, it's just like it's just all up to me, and I'd rather it be that way. Now, sometimes you run into scenarios where it's raining hard or it's foggy, and you need the monitor, and that is definitely used in situations like that, but I hardly ever go to it. The other thing too is, let's say you're coming to the finish of a race, and what you would be looking at would be a moving picture. But if you're looking through your binoculars or your naked eye, you can focus on the finish line, and when the horses hit it, you can see, who hit it first if you have the proper angle, whereas on a monitor, they're not going to stop. They just run right through it. So it's easier to do it with the naked eye or the binoculars. Actually, hardly ever binoculars when they come to the finish line, because you're close enough to do it with the naked eye.
Was there one time too where the horses were backlit coming around the stretch, the final turn, and it was tough to see and kind of figure that out on the fly? I think I read that from one point.
Oh yeah, so that would be the Belmont Stakes every year. It's the one race that you pray for clouds. And the reason being, the sun is setting right behind the horses as they turn for home at that time of the day and that time of the year. It just comes up that way every time. And I remember the first time I called the Belmont Stakes when it was sunny, that I did call for 3 straight years where the conditions were cloudy. And the next year, the sun came out at 5 minutes to post. It was cloudy all day, and the sun comes out, and I'm looking at those horses before the race up at the top of the stretch, and I'm like, I can see them okay. I guess these people have been telling me it's bad, but it's not that bad. I'll be fine. And so they turned for home in the Belmont Stakes, and thank God I knew who the 3 horses were, because their colors turned completely black when they turned for home. I couldn't see anything but black jockey silks. And I'm like, what the hell just happened here? You're just like, that can't be right. And that's what happens in the sunny Belmont Stakes. And I'll let you on a little bit of a funny thing that people don't realize. When I called American Pharoh's Belmont, right before I said the 37-year wait is over, I said, and here it is. And when I said, and here it is, I put my binoculars right on American Pharoh, because I wanted to make sure it was still him. Because his silks were so backlit and so hard to see in that lighting that I just wanted to absolutely 100% make sure I was calling the right horse. I mean, it couldn't possibly be anybody else, but I just wanted to triple check on that one.
Actually, it is kind of funny, because when you listen to it, you hear that, and here it is, and then there's the brief moment of pause, and then
that's my mind saying, okay, it's good, it's him. Well, we can go now.
And especially in the situation, that's not one you want to get wrong.
No, not at all.
Let me pull out a little bit and go larger picture on this. How does one, I know you got into it when your dad was installing sound systems and you were at a track and fell in love with the horse racing aspect of it and everything that was there. But once you made up your mind that this is what you wanted to do, how does one pursue doing that professionally and climbing that ladder and making a living out of it more than just being something you do?
Well, in my case, I got a little lucky to have had that in because my father did install the sound system at the track, I got to work where the announcer was and end up in the press box and got to know all the racing writers and the fellow that ran the press box at the track. And when I thought in my head that that's what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a race caller, I asked them if there was a place where I could practice. And they found places at the different tracks in Maryland where I grew up where I could go into almost a soundproof environment and just start practicing race calls. And that's what I would do. I would just call race after race live. And then one day I was doing that at Pimlico, and at the time the fellow who was the general manager of the track, Chick Lang, happened to walk by and hear me. And he went and talked to his son, who was the head of public relations, and said, "Hey, who's the kid up there calling races?" He says, "Oh, that's Larry. He wants to be an announcer." He says, "Well, let's get him started because we think
Cool.
I think he can do it." And so I started, calling one race a day as an assistant track announcer and did other odd jobs, gopher, and then it just went from there. Just sort of worked my way up the food chain, and things just took a while. Though there was a lot of times where I was hoping that I would get a certain job. I got turned down twice to be the track announcer at Churchill Downs, and a couple of other places that I thought I was going to get, and eventually it all worked out when you just have to wait and bide your time, and the right time comes up if you keep doing everything right.
I know you thought you were being pranked when NBC called for the first time. What was that like when you heard the voice kind of, and it sank in that that's really what was happening on the other end of the phone?
It was the most amazing thing you could just ever imagine, and that's how everything started to change for me. That day, it was. If you have time for the story, it's a pretty good one. I was in the announcer's booth at Gulfstream Park in Florida calling races that day, and it was a very quiet day, not a lot going on, and I just happened to have some time between races, and all of a sudden the phone started ringing in the announcer's booth, and I looked at the number, and it was a New York number, and I'm like, I wonder what this is. And the guy said, "Hey, my name is Fred Gadelli, and I'm the producer for the Triple Crown on NBC Sports. We wanted to talk to you about calling the races." So I said, "Oh, hi, Fred. How are you?" And I said, "As far as I know, that's Tom Durkin's job, because he had been doing it for so many years, and it was not made public that Tom was stepping down. And I thought somebody was just playing a prank on me." And he said, "Well, Larry, Tom is stepping down. We haven't made it public, and we want to meet you." And I'm like, "Okay." I was sort of taken aback by all this. I never saw it coming. And so, anyways, long story short, they flew me up to LaGuardia, picked me up, had me spend the night in New York City, and then the next morning I had lunch with Sam Flood, who was the executive producer for NBC Sports, and Fred Gadelli, who was the producer, and Rob Hyland, who was the producer of the undercard races that we had, and he's now our producer. And we had a nice lunch together, and then I headed back to Fred's office, and they're getting ready to get me out of there to fly back to Florida. And I look, and some guy's walking into the office, and I'm like, "Oh man, that's Dick Ebersol, the head of NBC Sports." And so he walks in, and he starts to talk to Fred about the fact that the Sunday Night Football schedule came out, because he's the producer for Sunday Night Football, and they were discussing the schedule. And Fred goes, "Hey, Dick, this is Larry. We're talking to him about maybe becoming our next race caller." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And then he went right back to talking about football. And so all of a sudden, Ebersol's leaving, walking out of the office, and he turns around and he goes, "Oh, hey, Larry." And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "Do you believe us now?" And it was a complete joke on me, the fact that he came in pretending he didn't care about the fact that I was there, and I think that the real reason he came in was to meet me, So I got a phone call. I flew back to Florida, and I'll never forget it. I'm in the bathroom at a restaurant, and the phone rings, and it's Fred calling me back saying, "Welcome to NBC Sports." And I just remembered, I just went outside and screamed at the top of my lungs. I was like, it was just the most amazing thing ever. And then you realize, oh my goodness, in 2 weeks I actually have to call the Kentucky Derby. I better get ready now.
Yeah, that was the other thing. Like, for 17 days, like, I think I would have screamed for another reason, like to figure out that I didn't have that much time to figure this out. How'd you do it?
I had it, with the second that I realized that phone call was real and it was from them, I started thinking about it. And I knew when we had a meeting and they wanted to interview me that they would ask me how I would call the Kentucky Derby. And I had 2 days before that meeting and I watched a dozen of them. And I worked out my game plan that I told you about earlier, and just ran it by him. I'm like, this is how I'm going to prepare to call the race. I'm going to look at how the favorite in the race breaks, any other thing that's important, and then I'll get to those 20 horses right away. And by the time they run a half a mile, I will have called all 20, and then I'll call it like any other horse race, except for the fact that it's the Derby and blah, blah, blah. And I told them that whole thing, and they looked at each other like, this dude's ready. and so and then the next, 2 weeks, they started sending me footage of all the prep races so that I could review all the horses, and they would send me the jockey silks so I could start prepping. And by the time I got to Kentucky, I was ready to roll, and, called it Animal Kingdom, winning the 2011 Kentucky Derby. And it was just incredible. I cried like a baby right after the race. I'll never forget it.
How did you get good at doing what you do? What was your process like to get yourself to the point where you're getting that phone call and you're growing and you're getting better? And obviously you're making those tapes when you're young, but once you started getting jobs, how did you improve? How did you get better at what you were doing?
I think the more you do it, the better you are at doing it. And also, I don't know. I just wanted to. Maybe I think there's a certain bunch of us that do this profession that just get it and just can relate a race the way it's supposed to be related. And I think that it's just something that there's a lot of repetition that helps, but you have to also try to get fresh, think of new ways to say certain things. Don't say the same thing every time when a situation comes up. I do the New York Times crossword puzzle every day, to try to I like never miss. I always try to, especially the tougher ones. I prefer I skip the Monday and Tuesday because they're too easy. but I think little things like that, all of a sudden words come into your head when you do that, and then when you get it into a rut, I'll tell my friends, give me a word of the day, something I can put into a race call, and then it just gets into your vocabulary. If you listen to, and he just amazes me. You listen to Doc Emmerich calling a hockey game. He can, the same situation can come up 5 times in a row, and he'll say it 5 different times, 5 different ways. His vocabulary and quickness and how he delivers it is mind blowing to me. And of course, that's why he keeps winning Emmys. But I think that's something that you strive for. You try to be able to be fresh and be able to change the way you say things, even if the scenario is similar to what you've seen before.
How has your voice developed too? This is a question I haven't asked on this podcast in a while, but how long have you sounded like you sound now? And how much work went into developing that sound?
The only really work that went into developing my voice was years ago, I took a voice class when I was living in Boston. I was calling the races at Suffolk Downs up there in Boston, and wanted to try to come up with a way to strengthen my voice a little bit. So I did take a voice class. It was kind of a theater class, and I remember the teacher saying to me within the first day, she goes, "You're from Maryland, aren't you?" And I said, "Really? Like you could tell that?" She goes, "Oh yeah." And I told her, I said, "Well, let's get rid of it. Let's try to work on that. I don't want to sound like I'm, provincial. I want to have a better sound. And so she started like telling me like the word EGG. She says, how do you say that? I'm like, well, I say egg. And she goes, no, it's not egg, it's egg. And little things like that, you find ways to say the words properly and make yourself sound better. So that after I did that, she taught me a few other vocal exercises to speak from the diaphragm, and then I think my voice just kind of naturally changed. I still don't think it's that great. It's just okay, and it's something that it's worked okay for me. But I listened back at some of my original race calls, and you just cringe. Was that me? That's horrible. And now it's like tolerable.
I know you've said that you work to be more guttural at times too, and you can hear it, when it's coming around, to the top of the stretch, and when horses will make big surges, it's that deep grab. Was that a conscious decision for you?
Yeah, it sure was, because I'd been accused by, and rightfully so, by some people about maybe getting a little too high pitched when I got excited, and I'm thinking, well, I'm going to get excited. That's not going to change when the situation's exciting. So what can I do about it? I'm going to sound excited, and can I sound excited and make it sound better? And that's when I just kind of thought maybe that's how I can handle it. Just kind of growl a little bit rather than screech like an owl.
It works out, so that's that's good.
Well, I'm glad.
I want to ask you one more thing, and then I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I am curious because I know you're known for it, so I want to exclude these two. But the horse's name that you have most enjoyed working with beyond My Wife Knows Everything and The Wife Doesn't Know.
Well, there's been a few over the years. There was a horse that ran in Florida named Harass that. You could take that in several different ways, and I remember calling races with that horse's name. There's just been a bunch over the years that like I mentioned before, like there's one. I'm a huge fan of the movie Naked Gun and Airplane. That's like my type of movie. That's
fantastic.
I'm completely sophomoric, and in fact, the other day we had a horse that ran at Belmont Park named Hey, It's Enrico Palazzo. I mean, and I was so excited. I mean, it was just this ordinary race, and like, oh, I get to call a horse named Hey, It's Enrico Palazzo, and so they're going around the turns like, Hey, it's Enrico Palazzo. And I was ready to do the whole Enrico Palazzo. For those of you that have seen Naked Gun, and if you haven't, you should be ashamed of yourself. So because it's fabulous. But I mean, I love to have fun with horses' names, especially in situations like that, movies that I enjoy, and all that good stuff.
Well, I want to let you get going so you can get working, diving into your Preakness prep. I'm sure it should be a fun next couple of weeks. This has got to be a good time of year to be Larry Collmus. So I appreciate you giving me a couple minutes of your time.
Joel, it's been my pleasure, and let's hope Justify can get through the second jewel of the Triple Crown, and then we can get him to Belmont Park and see what happens.
That makes your life a little bit more interesting too, doesn't it? Does it changes a little bit if Justify doesn't win this week?
It changes a lot. It changes a whole lot. When I remember got a kick out of it one year, we had I'll Have Another, who had won the Kentucky Derby in Preakness, and then he scratched the day before the Belmont Stakes with an injury, and I remember walking through the compound from NBC and at the Belmont Stakes, and in his sarcastic way, Bob Costas walked up to me and he said, Larry, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but your call tomorrow will take somewhat of a less historical significance. and I just said, Bob, I have no idea what you're talking about. But yeah, that's it is so night and day when there's a Triple Crown on the line and when there's not, as far as the both the excitement and the angst that is involved in getting ready for that race.
I have to stop talking because I'm going to keep thinking of things, but now I will. This is my for sure last question. What's it like? You mentioned Tom Hammond at the beginning, being able to work with guys like Tom and now Bob Costas, and just being around other people that are so at the top of their craft. How that's made you better too in the way that you just approach broadcasting and this craft in and of itself.
Well, the fact that you get to work with these guys and also get to pick their brain, is pretty cool. I mean, that was, believe me, when American Pharoh was going for the Triple Crown, and actually the year before too, I called California Chrome going for the Triple Crown. Not only did I talk to Tom, but here's Bob Costas. Here's a guy that is a legend in this business, and believe me, I sat down with him and say, hey, what approach do you think I should take? And the guy's he's somebody you want to listen to. And now we have Mike Tirico. I mean, talk about another just amazing sports broadcaster. Yeah. And just the nicest man you'd ever want to meet in your life too, by the way. And it's just mind-boggling that you get to be a part of this crew, and the NBC people, they're like family, and it's so cool working with them. And I remember when my first Kentucky Derby, and the first time I was working for NBC, and we had our production meeting in the trailer, and Bob Costas walked in, and he just kind of scanned the room with his eyes and walked right up to me. He says, I know every single person in this room except for you. You must be Larry. And that was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Here I was going to say, and you are, but I didn't do that. But yeah, I'm like, and now he's just Bob. He's just, he's the guy, you get to work with, and it's pretty cool stuff, to be honest with you.
All right, that's Larry Collmus joining us here on Play-by-Playcast, the voice of the Triple Crown on NBC. You can hear his voice next week with the Preakness Stakes, the 143rd running from Pimlico. Of course, you can check out his work from last week as well with the Kentucky Derby, and then 3 weeks after the Preakness will be the Belmont Stakes. You know what's interesting about that conversation? And, Larry mentioned the fact that he's never done anything other than broadcast horse racing. But I think a lot of the things he said are translatable to what anybody else does in this industry. What a hockey broadcaster does, to what a lacrosse broadcaster does, to what a curling broadcaster does, to what a horse racing broadcaster does in terms of his preparation, in terms of his ability to learn and forget information in an efficient manner, in terms of his voicing, in terms of the way that he is locked in watching an event. When he talked about not using the monitor and having to actually have his eyes on the horses at all times. All of those things are translatable. And that's one of the things I think is cool about this podcast, is that here I am reaching out to Larry. I'm probably never going to call a horse race in my life, although I wouldn't, you never know. I'm doing CrossFit, lacrosse, and tennis in a 1-month span. But I'm probably never going to call horse racing in my life. But in talking to Larry, who has never called anything other than horse racing, you very quickly start to find some common ground in terms of the craft and in terms of how we can all help make each other better by listening to how other people that are really good at what they do what they do. So it was fun to have Larry Collmus on this episode of PXPcast. Until next week, we say so long. We're out of time, though, for this one, so hit it, Marshmallow. 101 episodes. Kind of. In the books. We'll talk to you next week, right back here on PXPcast. We're out.
And that will do it from St. Louis, where the score is inconclusive.